Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hello, it is Peter Robbins returning with Meanwhile Here on Earth. Although we're having some camera problems today, so memorize my face. There you go. Because it will disappear regularly, and I think at a certain point I'll just leave it alone. You know what I look like. Special show tonight, two guests, both dear friends and close colleagues. And before we get started, one of the reasons we are doing this show tonight is, or this morning or the afternoon, depending on when you are watching, is because in about a week, on Labor Day weekend, which for anybody that does not live in America is the 4th and the 5th of September, my two guests and I will be among the speakers at the Exeter, New Hampshire UFO Conference, UFO Festival and Conference, a wonderful yearly event which, like everything else in the world, in the real corporeal three-dimensional world, has been set back 2 years. So we're all looking forward to reconnecting in a town as pretty as they get, classic New England, and we'll look at some pictures of it later. So, to my introductions. And one more time, let's just, there you go, still here, still looking good, but about to disappear again. Amazing, I must be psychic. Tonight, we have Jennifer W. Stein is fascinated by phenomena and has been paying attention to it all of her life. She says her life has been a personal study of ESP, precognition, and intuition, which has guided some of her most profound life choices, like who to marry, who to seek medical attention from, and when to pay attention to premonitions to avoid major accidents or serious life-threatening situations for herself and loved ones. A UFO sighting in 1975 set the course for open-mindedness early in her life, as well as a healing from appendicitis when she was 11. Jennifer was drawn to study ancient stone and effigy sites like Stonehenge, Newgrange, Serpent Mound, and many other ancient stone sites at an early age. As a result, she discovered crop circles in the United States, Canada, and in the UK. As a result, she published articles in periodicals and has appeared on Canadian and American television programs discussing this research. She has also traveled to many ancient sites around the globe with some top researchers. A few highlights of this research: she went to Turkey with author and Egyptologist John Anthony West in 2009, and Göbekli Tepe in Turkey with geologist and author Robert Schoch in 2012, and many South American sites in the footsteps of Zecharia Sitchin, looking for clues to humanity's lost history in 2004 and again in 2012. Jennifer has led small research groups on trips into crop circles and archaeological museums around the world, as well as to some ancient sites. She is an accomplished seamstress, artist, entrepreneur, activist, organic gardener, Ashanti yogi practitioner and teacher, a meditator, a researcher, a 20-year MUFON state section director for Pennsylvania, and now for Arizona as well. She is a former professional event coordinator with her own business, twice serving as chairwoman for MUFON's National Symposium in Philadelphia. In addition, Jennifer is an award-winning self-taught documentary filmmaker, has won 4 EB Film Awards at Open Minds UFO International UFO Congress film festivals. She is best known for one of her documentary films, Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton, which has gone on to win 28 mainstream film festival awards, a rather uncommon accomplishment for a documentary about a UFO event. Jennifer founded Mainline MUFON, a free public monthly educational lecture series for the Mutual UFO Network in the Wayne area of Pennsylvania in 2022. She's the host of a public access television program called Mainline MUFON, which has archived 10 years of interviews on their YouTube channel with guest speakers. Details can be found at mainlinemufon.com. Additionally, Jennifer, along with filmmaker Ron James, became the early architect and business developers of a video streaming platform for MUFON, called MUFON Television. She holds a bachelor's degree in science from the University of Arizona, where she now resides. Bob Terrio grew up in the suburbs of Boston. His curiosities began early in life and included many interests: dinosaurs, space as well as space travel, nature, ghosts, UFOs, ESP, God, life after death, and many of life's other mysteries. He grew up very much enjoying art, photography, was a big reader, like me, a model maker, devoted to music, mostly classical and movie soundtracks. Movies, in that he had collected 8mm monster movies and cartoons as a kid, and has built on that thousands of DVDs library, making movies, and an assortment of outdoor activities. While showing early talent as an artist, Bob's love of movies and filmmaking won out in a major pursuit at the Rochester Institute of Technology. During his senior year at RIT, Bob produced a 30-minute 16mm film documentary about psychic phenomena titled Psych. Part of the documentary covered the life and work of the famous American psychic Edgar Cayce. Cayce's son, Hugh Lynn Cayce, was so impressed with the film that he hired Bob in 1975 to produce a full documentary about the life and work of his remarkable father. That documentary ran daily at the Edgar Cayce Foundation, also known as ARE, in Virginia Beach, Virginia, for 19 years. While most of Bob's work has been for corporate or industrial clients, he occasionally produced or worked on a number of documentaries about some of his side interests, including ghosts, UFOs, and psychic phenomena. Some of the highlights of this work are documentaries about Jane Roberts and the Seth material, Travis Walton's UFO abduction experience, Betty and Barney Hill's alien abduction experience. He has also recorded over 100 lectures for MUFON. Bob has had the good fortune to meet and work with some of the top researchers in these fields, including Linda Moulton Howe, Richard Dolan, Jennifer Stein, Stanton Friedman, Kathleen Marden, Travis Walton, Robert Butts, who is the husband of Jane Roberts, myself, and a number of people who knew and worked with Edgar Cayce. Bob was a corporate and videographer of Jennifer Stein's documentary. A co-producer and videographer of Jennifer Stein's documentary, Travis, the True Story of Travis Walton, and associate producer and videographer of the documentary, The Extraordinary Life and Suspicious Death of James Forrestal, among their other collaborative projects, one of which we will be introduced to this evening. Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth, you guys.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks for having us.
And let me see if I click on the button, it can put a momentary appearance. Yes, it's still me. Oh, okay, that was quick. So I'm going to be the mysterious voice in the darkness, and you two are going to be my guests. And it is, again, such a pleasure having you here. As we know, we have worked together on a number of projects over the years, And I am trying to remember. I know, Bob, I met you through Jennifer, but what was the project? And Jennifer, can you remind us of how you and I first met?
Yeah, I remember how we met. We met at the Rochester MUFON Symposium in, I think, the year 2000.
Ah, okay.
And you introduced me to many people there, including Rich Dolan and David Jacobs and Timothy Good and a number of people. And of course, Kathleen was there with her aunt,
Right.
Betty Hill. So I got to meet them in person too
course.
that year. So it was a very
And-
special year. And it was the foyer that was the beginning of my entrance into the Mutual UFO Network that
Yeah.
year in 2000.
And what was the project you were working with Bob on that I became involved in and met Bob as a result?
Oh, well, that was First Contact. You and
Oh my
Stanton and
God.
Richard traveling the country in an RV. That was our hopeful project that sci-fi actually bit at and greenlit, and within a week went bankrupt and refinanced, and the whole project got dropped. So that was when we met.
We don't usually begin the show this manner, but I'll tell you what, of all the projects that almost happened in my life in terms of the media, and there have been many, because as we know, no matter how well-intentioned, these things more often than not do not come to fruition. It's the nature of the beast. But
Right.
this one, imagine you're me, ladies and gentlemen, and somebody says, hey, I've got an idea for a show. What about you and Stanton Friedman and Richard M. Dolan riding around the country in a big tour bus, visiting sites of UFO-related events? You would have a assistant, a driver, a commissary person. The tour bus would be, as well decked out as for any major celebrity rock and rollers. And you would travel around the country. And if that weren't enough, at night, you'd have your own bat cave in that producer discovered just outside of Philadelphia, a perfectly kept stainless steel diner built in 1947, only open for breakfast and lunch, who would have been happy to allow us to have it for filming in the evenings. And we, thanks to Jennifer and a lot of planning and a lot of hard work, we got the bus, we got the driver, we got the budget to do the project, the pilot, and it just never happened. But I think about that show sometimes, this stillborn thing that, yeah, I could have handled driving around the country for a couple of seasons with Stan and Richard and you guys. That wouldn't have been a bad thing.
Right. Your good friend Larry Landsman, was the one who
Yeah.
brought the project to Sci-Fi,
That's right.
and they were
Yeah.
quite interested. They actually said yes, and then the whole station had to refinance, unfortunately. But that was, unfortunately, it's not online anymore. But maybe sometime we can do a show about it. Stanton's very excited about that too. He really would have liked that to come.
Let's begin in a little more traditional beginning, and I'll go back and forth between the two of you. Bob, we know each other quite well at this point, and your love of science fiction is only matched by your scholarship in the area of great science fiction films. And at what point in your life, in your childhood, did you become distinctly aware that aside from, flying saucers in the movies, that there was this phenomena called UFOs or flying saucers or, whatever the term was, that might well be real, and that it was completely separate from science fiction UFOs, and that the world made fun of it? Do you remember a point in your childhood where that electrical synapse snapped?
It was at a fairly early age, and somewhere in the late 50s, early 60s. I became aware of it partly through there were some news stories at the time. There were flaps and interest in UFOs. I think there might have even been a couple of documentaries made that I became aware of. in addition to seeing, there were actually some comic books that came out with UFO themes that were like, oh, real, UFO stories, as well as several books. So I became aware of those maybe around the age of 10, 11 or 12 years old. And I was into that, and I was into ghosts and Bigfoot and all kinds of interesting stuff going on in the world. But UFOs definitely caught on. And then at that point, we were starting the space race.
Yes.
And that was a big deal because we were in grade school, and every time there was a launch from Shepherd to John Glenn, they would put a TV in the gymnasium and set up chairs, and the whole grade school would go in and watch this event. So I became fascinated by that, as well as the whole UFO phenomenon. It was all kind of happening at once. So I became fairly aware of this situation early on, and then Life magazine came out with an excellent article about it, which I clipped out and still have that. I don't have the whole issue, but I have that. And around the same time, I was in the third grade. I became aware that there were 8mm films of cartoons and monster movies available in the stores. I'm in the third grade, and my folks, as they did every year, what do you want for Christmas? And I said, a movie projector.
Of course.
Like, a movie projector? I go, no, a real movie projector. And much to my surprise, what am I, like 11 years old? I get a regular family, real home movie projector for Christmas. I was shocked.
Brilliant.
But my dad got an 8mm camera so he could take movies of the family. But that was my projector. I had control of that.
How can I say? You were the oldest of four brothers. Did the impact of your passions kind of run downstream to them, or they had their own stuff they were into and were not necessarily science fiction?
Yeah, they were all into their own things. I mean, I was the only strange one in the family. Although my mom, we grew up in a Irish Catholic family outside of Boston. My mom read about true ghost stories, and she first read one of the Edgar Cayce biographies that I picked up and read. So she doesn't like to admit it, but she kind of had a big influence on my early years, straying from the path, as we say.
Yeah. Jennifer, you grew up in a house that your father designed and built. Your parents were rather remarkable, really iconoclastic, marched to their own drummer. And you and your sister grew up in the countryside. I'm guessing with a fair amount of, dreams that girls have growing up in the United States at that time. But something happened to you in childhood that was difficult to reconcile, and something that you went public with many years later that obviously impacted on your passion for the subject of unidentified and anomalous aerial phenomena. Can you tell us about that event that you woke up to?
Sure, I'll be happy to. I'll try to shorten it because you can tell a story in a long way or a short way. But basically, I had a bedroom with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over a meadow and then a couple acres of Mennonite farmland. And I could see about a mile and a half, of ground from my bedroom window. And I woke up one morning at 5:30 in the morning. It was not light out. It was what I call black and white. The sun hadn't quite come up yet. It was probably middle September, end of August, middle September in 1975. And I had read Edgar Cayce's work and was interested in learning about my subconscious. And I was journaling dreams very actively. So I had a dream and I woke up and I immediately went for the journal and grabbed it and was trying to write down this dream. And as I look out my window in front of me, about a mile and a half away, 45 degrees on the horizon, was a rectangle of white light. If you took your fingers at arm's length, kind of like about that far apart from each other, I was mesmerized by looking at this rectangle. I tried to go back to write my dream, but I was thinking, what the heck is that?
Yeah.
And at the moment that I finally looked at it and asked, really point blank, okay, what's that? It's not moving. It's still a rectangle. It's been there a minute and a half, 2-3 minutes, something like that. And at the moment I asked the question, boom, it was smack in front of me. It was right above a big tree in our meadow. It was probably about 70 to 90 feet long, because it was sitting right above the big tree, not on it, but above it. That tree was about probably 70 to 90 feet high, and its breadth of its branches were as wide as it was high. It was a huge, big old oak tree, which is still there in our meadow. And that really got my attention. And then I realized I was sort of paralyzed. I couldn't move. I was crying. And I think it downloaded maybe some kind of information to me. And then I noticed it was zipping away when what I thought was just a few seconds. But then I realized it was light out and it was 7 o'clock. And that really kind of freaked me out, because I didn't have that perspective of time.
Yeah.
I had run in and woke up my mother after the UF took off and asked her if she saw it, and she did not. That stayed in my gray box for about 25 years, me trying to figure out what it was, until someone else who was at my house at the time, 25 years later, said to me, what happened when we saw that UFO? And this was a friend from Up With People who was asleep on another level of the house on an outdoor porch that had the same view I did. And that was around 1999 or 1995 when I'd gone to visit him. And I realized at that point I had to unpack this experience, that it was real beyond a shadow of a doubt. I then knew it was real. It was not just a figment of my imagination, or it wasn't just a dream that I was having. And that's when I began to really step into the field and study it. And I'm so glad I did, because it's really changed my life, and it's opened a whole world of friends and information seekers and very brave souls who are willing to digest this arena, I'll call it, because it is one where you don't always know what the borders of reality are.
Jennifer, a quick follow-up question. When you decided to really look at this experience, you did it in an extremely public way. You did an interview for one of the major newspapers in the greater Philadelphia area that was a full, with pictures page feature. Did that come back to you in any ways that were, for the individuals, not for you, awkward, anxiety provoked, weirded out?
It didn't provoke anxiety for me, but I lived in a very conservative community. I also ended up on a local cable network television show in our area called CN8, which was a call-in show. I did the program on crop circles because I had just made a trip to crop circles for the first time. And then some local people from my daughter's school came up to me at the parent cocktail party and kind of said, I saw you on television. I saw the article you did. And that's about what they said. And they walked away. And I was pretty much forever shunned as the weirdo, in spite of the fact that I was a major fundraiser for the school, and I did videos for the school, and I did, I was a parent, a teacher's aide, and was a class mom several times. Both of my daughters were in that school. It was a very conservative girls' school on the main line of Philadelphia, right in the heart of Bryn Mawr. And people weren't really quite so open, but some people were really quite curious. It certainly set the tone for the next 25 or 30 years for sure.
Gosh, I guess.
But I don't regret it, but you got to know who your friends were when you step outside the box.
Yeah. Bob, I know for me, when I was growing up and became aware of this alleged phenomena called channeling, being a pragmatist, a skeptic, a wise guy, and always, in one way or another, approaching a mystery by asking if the solution could be the most mundane, incredibly boring thing first, rather than go for the gold and then nothing happens and you work your way down. And I remember thinking, when this phenomenon was described to me, I saw it, illustrated in some movie. You roll your eyes back in your head, you talk in a funny voice and make believe you're a 5,000-year-old disembodied spirit, and you tell this poor sucker what you think they want to hear, and then you get your money and you go away, and then you knock somebody else out. Until I was in my early 30s and read my first book about Edgar Cayce. And that really was like getting hit in the face by a bucket of cold water in terms of my skepticism, and more than skepticism, I had an attitude. And then to start to read work by him and begin to realize that I had no idea what was going on here, except that there seemed to be some aspect of this phenomena that was truly extraordinary, outside of the realm of our normal senses. And it was a bit of a milestone for me. You came to Cayce's work, I think, sometime before Jennifer and I did. Do you remember kind of going through a window like that, so to say, or you just got it as you read it and took it seriously from the start?
I kind of fell into a big hole. Because at the time, like I said, most of my interests were UFOs, Bigfoot, ghosts, things like that. That had not a very highly intellectual treatments at those times. And I was aware of ESP and those sorts of things. And I, during my college years, right out of high school, I spent the summers managing the box office of a summer stock theater in New Jersey, of all things.
Right.
And I knew I would have some time for reading. So I grabbed some of the books that my mom had read, thinking, try to find some interesting reading material, one of which was the Edgar Cayce biography, There Is a River.
Yes.
No particular reason why that stuck out any more than anything else. It's just the several books that I brought. So I got down there to the Jersey Shore, and in my off time, I started reading it. And it was fascinating and challenging, especially when I got to the parts where Cayce talked about reincarnation. And having grown up in a normal Catholic family outside of New England, I didn't believe in reincarnation. That was something for, weird people in strange parts of the world to believe in. That can't be real. And I put the book down. But a few days later, I'm like, well, the rest of this book is pretty interesting, and his life seems pretty, well researched at that point. Yeah. So I picked it back up and I gave it another chance. And by the time I finished the book, I was totally fascinated by his life and story.
Yeah.
So I became a member of the ARE, and I started buying any book I could about him, his work and life. So through my college years, I really became a super follower of the Cayce material, and I got their monthly newsletters, and I was just like totally absorbed by it. And I think for a lot of people like yourself, and I don't know if it's because of his Christian point of view and his personal story, but it really was a gateway for a lot of people to get into researching this whole field. And even at that point, they weren't necessarily calling it channeling. They were calling, being able to heal,
doing readings
and that sort of thing. They really weren't calling what he did channeling. And the interesting thing was, as I was there in the summer of 1975, and they didn't really have a budget for the film. Hughlin Cayce said, we've been trying to get this film done for years. We don't seem to be able to put it all together. But he says, I like what you did about my dad in your film. So he says, we're going to have you come down. We're going to have you work odd jobs, which I did, mostly in the audio-visual department, recording lectures and things of that nature. And he said, we'll try to somehow get this made. So it took several months of occasionally borrowing or renting 16 millimeter equipment, buying some film, and shooting interviews and shooting B-roll material over a period of from say June until September, when we finally had all the footage that was needed. But while I was working there at the ARE, a couple of the young people there, we got talking at parties and so forth. And they said, wow, you would really like reading about this channeler, Jane Roberts, and the Seth material.
Yeah.
And the word channeler, even at that point in my life, even though I've been kind of following it closely with the Cayce story, the word channeling to me was just kind of like, I don't know. But then, of course, I had to buy one of the books and just to check it out.
Yeah,
they were pushing it highly, and that to me opened up another doorway, because as much as I like the Cayce material and it's interesting, and he did psychic not so much healings but diagnostic work and other life readings. The Seth material came through in a whole new dialogue and presented this material in a whole different way that I found a little more clarifying and fascinating in a different way. And then I became kind of hooked on that.
And you just visited only a week or so ago Jane Roberts' family home, as I recall.
They were renting an apartment. They never became very wealthy. Up in Elmira, New York.
Yep.
A big old beautiful Victorian house that was built in the 1880s. And then somewhere in the early 19th century, it became a series of apartments.
Sure.
So they for 15 years rented basically a fairly tiny apartment there. But it was there that Jane had her first out-of-body experience, which led them on the path of eventually channeling Seth and writing over 24 books.
Gosh.
By Jane, and both Seth dictated books. So they call it the Seth House. And after Jane and Rob moved out, it just became a landmark for Seth enthusiasts.
Yeah.
But it was rented to a bunch of kind of, I don't want to say low-income people, to say it that way. And the house kind of fell into disrepair, and it was in pretty bad shape. And then I'm thinking about 6-7 years ago, a woman who was interested in the Seth material, Shara Wago was her name, suddenly had, and she had intuitions and different, sometimes messages. She would sometimes even hear voices to tell her to do certain things. And she had an aunt that lived in Elmira, and she went to visit her aunt. And while there, she got this message it said, go to the Seth House. So she went to visit the Seth House, and while there, found that there was one of the rooms available for rent. So on a whim, she decided she was going to move in. And that led her on a path to decide, okay, I'm going to make some efforts to try to fix this building up, try to raise some funds, and maybe eventually even turn this into a welcome center, museum.
Yeah.
So it was just within the last number of 6 months or so that they were able to purchase the building. It's a 501c organization at this point, and she's done a lot of work. Had just a handful of people helping her, but a lot of this has been herself. They have a lot left to go, but she has a vision of turning this into a kind of similar to what the Edgar Cayce Foundation is for his work. This will be kind of a place where people can go and make a Seth Center, a Seth Foundation that will house a lot of the materials and artifacts and hold conferences and that sort of thing. So,
Jennifer, when you were growing up, were you reading about some of these non-standard subjects, or was your reading choices more traditional? What?
Well, I will share that I also read the Seth material, Seth Speaks and the Nature of Personal Reality, when I was about 19, because my sister was reading this. So when I was about 10, 11, 12 and growing up, my sister and I would play this game where we would sit back to back, right, with our backs to each other with a full deck of cards. She would go through the cards and pull out a card and say, okay. And I was 9 years younger, and she would say, well, just pull out the first card you come to, right? So I would. And it would be the same card that she had. And we would do this again and again and again and again and again. And it almost unnerved me at times. I was like, wow. It was a way of drilling, sort of like waking up your intuitive awareness as a child. And I also had odd and bizarre experiences sometimes as a child. I realized later as an adult, I was having some out-of-body experience, and I was able to recount it when I woke up. I can remember feeling a sensation, and this will sound very odd, but I remember floating around my house almost as if it was filled with water and I was swimming through the house, you know, like a swimming dream where you're flying, but you're swimming through the air.
Yeah.
And I can remember flipping over and like hovering, like right below the ceiling, and then like hovering around my house and discovering stains and cracks and holes in the ceiling. That then the next day I would go downstairs and look up and go, oh, wow, like it's really there. The biggest thing I remember, I got a spanking for when I was about 7 or 8. I found myself in like a lucid dream state, hovering outside my neighbor's window. Now, my neighbor's house there was about 6 steps to get up into their house, like concrete steps. So their basement was slightly elevated, you know, and the house sat on top of that.
Right.
But I was hovering at a dining room window, looking down into their dining room. And this was very late at night. And I remember the owner of the house, it was my playmate's father, this big blanket laid out, and he had all these guns and rifles laying out on his dining room table. And he was fiddling with them. I'm sure as an adult, he was cleaning them, right? Or maybe putting, you know, ammunition in them or taking it out. And I never knew they had guns. I was like, wow, like I didn't know they had all those guns. And I'm sitting there watching him from a height above the ground. Then I looked down and I went, how can I be here? I'm like 6 feet off the ground. And then I thought to myself, if I can see Mr. Bolts, can he see me?
Yeah.
And at that moment, he got up, came right up to the window, and flipped blinds closed. And I was like shocked. I was like, oh, I thought he saw me. Well, he didn't, but about a week later, we discovered we had a groundhog or a squirrel or something in our barn that we had to get rid of. And my dad was saying, who do we know that has guns? You know, and I said, oh, Mr. Bolt has guns. Well, that got me a spanking because it was assumed that myself and my young playmate, who was my age, had gotten into their gun locker somehow in the basement, which we had not. I never even knew we had guns. And I couldn't really explain to my parents how I knew that they had guns. I was like, oh, well, I think I saw him cleaning his guns, but, you know, I can't, you know, and of course he denied ever taking the guns out. And it was just assumed we got into them because obviously the adults talk. Yeah. But I got a spanking. I was the older one. And it was assumed that I convinced my young playmate that we were going to get into the guns in the basement, which I never even knew where it was. So those kinds of experiences informed me that the world is much bigger than we know. And then when I started to have precognitive experiences, which I have continued to have a bit of my adult life, I paid attention to them. And they have saved my life. They've saved the life of my daughter and my friends. They've helped me avoid car accidents. It's been very profound. And I just listened to that gut instinct really, really profoundly.
Jennifer, when was the first time, follow up here, following these experiences, your readings, this becoming more and more a part of your thinking, philosophy, if you will, that you actually took it to the next level and did something, wrote an article, made a film, gave a talk, researched a certain topic. How did you make that transition into starting to be a contributor in the paranormal fields as opposed to a consumer and somebody who was an experiencer?
Wow, that's a good question. I think it's probably when I stepped into the UFO field, although I was already doing public speaking in the Philadelphia area. I was the president of a Jewish women's organization. I founded the Coalition Against Jewish Domestic Violence, and I was going out in the community and speaking to rabbis and things like that, and speaking before full congregations on the topic of domestic violence in the Jewish community, which is something that is not well known. So I was already sort of making a contribution and stepping forward. I was involved in my daughter's schools and things like that, but I hadn't yet really addressed what we call the woo-woo subjects, right? The precognitive ESP, life after death experiences. But I would say that when my father died and he came to communicate with me in an out-of-body state and tell me things that there is no way I could have known, told me things I did not know once he died, that then I recounted back to my mother. That was a profound shift, because my father said, you're gifted, you're awake, you have a third eye, you have extended vision. Use it. It will benefit you. Don't go back to sleep. And I'm always here by your side when you need me.
Gosh.
And that was so profound. And I wasn't with him the moment he died. But when I got to the hospital, he was, of course, had passed. So I knew that the communication I was getting from him was real.
Yeah.
And then I continued to stay with him for about 45 minutes, pulled the curtain around him. No one knew he was passed. And I think that was a profound shift for me. I was right about 20 years old, and I really learned to listen to my instinct even more at that point and let it guide me. But it was really 2000 when I stepped into this kind of UFO world more profoundly.
Bob, as you move through Rochester Institute, a wonderful school, of course, and your thoughts were more and more in the realm of a love that we both share, which is film and filmmaking. Were there any particular films, again, a specialty of yours and a great enjoyment is great classic science fiction films, that kind of went in a direction where it really addressed the reality of truly anomalous, advanced craft from parts unknown, etc., that stayed with you? A UFO-related science fiction film that kind of caught you from right field and made you think more deeply about this because it was a particularly good film, or even increased your interest in UFOs per se rather than UFOs in science fiction?
I will say that there were two UFO-related films or sci-fi films that deeply impacted me. And of course, while growing up, I saw all sorts of sci-fi and monster movies and scary stuff, which didn't scare me that much. But there was one film, Invaders from Mars, which I'm sure you've seen. It's a classic. And I saw it once, and it scared the Jesus out of me.
Yeah.
And to the point where we slept over at my aunt and uncle's one time when my parents were away, and that film came on again. And within a few minutes, I couldn't watch it. I had to go in another room. And that's never happened with any other scary or sci-fi movie. And that affected me greatly. And then the other film that really changed the course of my life, because I had had some talents for art when I was young. And my mom had been an art major and an art teacher, and she recognized that. And she was pushing me in the direction of becoming a professional artist and an illustrator. But of course, I had a love of movies. But through high school, I was debating whether I should go into art like my mom wanted. But I really loved, at that point, I just experimented a little bit with making some 8mm films. And I love movies. And I go, I'd love to get into that business as well. And it was for my 16th birthday that the film 2001: A Space Odyssey
Oh, gee.
came out. And we went with the family for my birthday to the Cinerama Theater in Boston. And within about halfway through the film, our then and there said, I have got to get into this business. If I can affect somebody the way this film is affecting me, it just blew me away. And that was the moment where I decided I'm going to become a filmmaker.
That's great. You struck a nerve for me in that for some film fans, science fiction film fans, the version of Invaders from Mars that they are familiar with is Tobe Hooper's remake of it, I think from the 90s, which, like so many remakes, why did they even bother? The original film, and I saw it as a little boy. Well, my mom was great about letting me go to the movies starting at the age of about 7 with my little circle of friends on a Saturday, and only put her foot down once on something that turned out to be a complete miscall on a very innocent film. But the thing about Invaders from Mars, which I believe the budget on that film was between $60,000 and $100,000 tops.
It was not large.
It was not large at all. And I'll tell you one thing, fish bowls have never been the same for me. It's the only classic science fiction film told from beginning to end through the eyes of the child character. He's not like an extra stuck away in the corner. It's all happening to him. He's the one putting together the pieces. And as we know, it was strangely prophetic. It deals with abduction. It deals with implants in the creepiest way possible. Underground bases. And I think the most elegant device, now is this a spoiler? It probably is the way the film ends. They do something very special where you think you're out of hot water and then you realize, wait, it's just beginning again.
And it was constructed almost like watching a nightmare, sharing a nightmare. The way it was shot and edited, it really had that quality of not being real, of kind of being just creepy, and the noise from the sand pits when they would.
That was one of the things I was going to say. That'd be laughable for a lot of people now.
Bunch of voices going, and that just hearing that, I could hear that now, and it still gives me goosebumps.
And the simple special effect of the telepathic leader in the glass container.
Oh, the leader in the glass bowl. Yeah.
Ooh. Well, we're off on a joyous tangent here, geeking out.
And just by the way, for fans, by the way, of fans for this, it's only been available on a very low quality DVD for many years. Looks like it's made from a 16mm print, and it was shot in Technicolor. It's finally being released at the end of this September on Blu-ray.
Oh, we are going to have a party.
It should look great.
And with any luck, scare the hell out of ourselves again.
Oh yeah. Scare my grandkids now.
Jennifer, one of the things that you have a passionate interest in and have been fortunate enough to be able to explore is ancient sites, ancient civilizations, and locations that, well, to use a phrase of from film noir, the stuff that dreams are made of. Tell us first a little bit about the, how can I say, well, the Turkish temple that was discovered not that many years ago that is proving to be over 16,000 years old and has become, even though it's in a somewhat remote area, a major destination for seekers, for people who are interested in ancient cultures, religion, archaeology. Tell us a little bit about your experience of visiting.
Well, we're talking about Göbekli Tepe, which is a circle of standing stones much like people may think of Stonehenge as a circle of standing stones, except these stones are articulated or carved and are slightly more delicate in the way in which they stand, not so much embedded deeply in the ground and not solid, thick stones that just sort of stand upright. But they're thin stones that seem to have a T shape so that they're carved to look like a T, which is very strange. And they have carvings, many of them on the side and on the front edge. They're almost what some people think of as being anthropomorphic stones, and they seem to have constellational alignments, probably with Taurus in the night sky near the closest spring equinox. There's a series of stones, circles, which have been discovered all next to each other. 5, or I think so far, have been uncovered, but there remains another 21 buried in the ground on the surrounding large limestone hill that's about 1,000 feet above sea level and it's about 1,000 feet above the lower terrain, which is around it. So this is an area that's often referred to as probably the top of the Fertile Crescent, the beginning of what might have been the Garden of Eden during biblical times, right where the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers begin in southeastern Turkey, not too far, about 16 miles from the Syrian border. And I was lucky enough to go there in 2012 with Robert Schoch, who is one of the world-renowned geologists in the world, probably best known for dating the water erosion on the Sphinx and the encasement wall around the Sphinx, which most likely dates that Sphinx to be from a much earlier time, not 2000 or 3000 BC, as the Egyptologists would lead us to believe, but 10 to 20 or maybe even 30,000 years before that, because of the substantial water erosion. There's 10,000 years worth of water erosion on that encasement wall around the Sphinx, which is still visible. Robert Schoch's theory so agitated the Egyptologists that they commissioned the Sphinx to be resurfaced so that the evidence of the water erosion on the Sphinx is now covered up. But of course, they didn't bother to do the encasement wall behind the Sphinx, which is stone, which made the Sphinx. So sorry, I'm diverging briefly into the Sphinx in Egypt, but Robert Schoch was highly criticized for coming up with this theory, even though it stood on firm geologic principles of water erosion and wind erosion, which he clearly defined the difference of in Egypt. And he was criticized, saying, if that was true, if there was civilization that was around at that point, there would be evidence. We would know it. We would be able to find pottery shards. And you've made this all up and you think you're so smart. And then, of course, Klaus Schmidt, who's a German archaeologist, is the one who did carbon dating in and around, to go back to Tepe stones when they started to be uncovered in 1996. And they found carbon datable material. So they found organic material which had been deliberately buried around these stones. And that dated back to a good 12,000 years BC, right to the point where Robert had brought attention about the Sphinx, that it had to be that period of time or earlier. So I feel very, very grateful to have the privilege to realize that there are ancient civilizations that have been around for thousands of years, and we've had very arrogant science that isn't willing to look at that. And there's a few brave souls who are whistleblowers who stepped forward and challenged the status quo, like Zachariah Sitchin, although he did it with Sumerian language. He wasn't a scientist, he wasn't a geologist, but he was a Syriologist and a linguist. And he started to look at the Sumerian tablets and said, there's evidence. They're speaking of a much earlier time. They're speaking of the days of old that are in the Bible. So
let me jump in for a moment in that I remember when the story broke about the dating of the Sphinx, and overnight, Dr. Schoch, who is, of course, a highly respected archaeologist, scientist. He became the most reviled person in the area of official state-sanctioned, so to say, views on Egyptology, coming from that very colorful, long-serving former head of the Egyptian Archaeological Commission. I forget what his title was.
Azawi
Again,
Hawass.
there you go. Kind of the Phil Klass of, it was, you cannot, these are sacred, in quote, for the preservation of ego, even the thought that Jewish slaves labored on the pyramids, it makes the Egyptians look like they, were slacking a bit. And of course, any notions of ancient alien assistant, which I think is fair criticism, that human beings are capable of extraordinary things, although we are still dealing with a genuine mystery, though. But again, the hatred that was directed toward him for, how could that be? That would be before there was an Egypt. But wait, the Sphinx is ours, and don't even think about taking those bragging rights away from us. That's fighting talk. Right.
Well, Robert now believes that it's a badge of honor,
Yeah.
just like
we have just blown through our first hour, and we will be back in about 4 minutes. This is Peter Robbins. The show is Meanwhile Here on Earth. My guests are Bob Terrio and Jennifer Stein. And yet one more moment. There I am. I'm about to disappear again. We'll see you in 4 minutes.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Are we alone in the universe? The most important question facing humanity is on the verge of being settled once and for all. The Mutual UFO Network has been at the forefront of this journey for nearly 50 years. Our members worldwide are dedicated to the research, documentation, and awareness that will shape the future of humanity. Won't you join us?
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected. Only at kgradb.com.
And welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, Peter Robbins, and my special guests, Jennifer W. Stein and Bob Terrio. And I am here even though you cannot see me. My camera is fighting with me. We'll give it one more shot so I can make a quick guest appearance on my own show. There I am. And 5, 4, 3, 2. No, I didn't make it down to 1. If you are enjoying this show, what you're seeing of it and listening to, know that you can subscribe for a month, for a year, trial subscription for 3 days if you want, and have access to all of the shows we have done here and Meanwhile Here on Earth, but more to the point, to the dozens and dozens of other shows, and I'm sure several thousand back episodes going back years. KGRA's archive is indeed extraordinary, and all you need to do is visit them at KGRADB, as in digitalbroadcasting.com. And if you use my name, Peter, Peter, as your subscription code, you will get a full 30% discount. And 30% ain't nothing to sneeze at. I actually, you guys, am really excited about the second part of this show, because we still have a lot to cover. And what I want to jump in with is, first, you have collaborated on a number of projects together at this point, as co-producers, as director, as videographer, as co-writers, as co-developers of projects. And the three of us will be speaking in about a week and a half in beautiful Exeter, New Hampshire at the Exeter UFO Conference and Festival. And you're doing 2 different topics in your talks, but the topic that you are presenting on, Bob, is a documentary that you and Jennifer have been developing that when you first told me about it, my first thought was, could this be a hoax? Well, of course, anything can be anything. But when you investigate what you suspect, and there's nothing there that suggests that anybody's going to make any money off of this, it immediately kind of changes the battlefield. And right. I'm not only delighted that you are allowing us a preview of this documentary. It's in 2 parts because we can only show like a maximum of 10-minute clip here. This is about 14 minutes. And I want to jump right into it. This is going to be like watching a mini movie with you guys, and then talk about what the hell we're dealing with here and what it may represent, and why, well, I think it'll be apparent why you zoned in on this as a project. Can you tell us what it is called, what the name of the working title of the film is?
It's got a couple of different we call it Aliens in Ancient Mexico. That's kind of the come on title to kind of get people interested.
Yeah.
But it really focuses on these artifacts. And at some point, I'll let Jennifer kind of tell the story, because she's the one that really found out about this and initiated this whole project. If you hear some rumbles, we're about to get a thunderstorm here.
Oh, cool. We had ours earlier.
Yeah. I do some editing of streaming videos for a company in England called Zohar Entertainment.
Yeah.
And the initial intention was for us to create a full-length documentary, at least 60 minutes or more, on this topic. And we'll tell you a little bit about how it started and got initiated. But then COVID came along and kind of knocked the wind out of the sails. So at that point, based on the footage we already had, I said, well, I can put together a little 10 to 12 minute or so video about the topic just that Zohar can run, and hopefully it'll generate more interest. And at some point, we will hopefully do a more expanded version of the story.
Well, let's jump into it right now and then immediately go to part 2 as part 1 ends. Here we go.
Mexico, home to some of Earth's most advanced, mysterious, and violent ancient civilizations. Archaeologists and historians continue to uncover treasures buried for centuries in the jungles and the deserts of Mesoamerica. The Olmecs, one of the earliest to occupy the region, left behind giant stone heads, whose features resemble races from the African continent. The Mayans, whose pyramids and architecture rival the monuments of Egypt, the Middle East, India, and the Orient, developed a form of picture writing and ways of recording dates on stone. And the Aztecs, who, like the pre-Columbian civilizations that preceded them, practiced a religion that relied on natural forces. They too built tremendous temples, carved monumental structures, and complex sculptures, masks and ornaments, as well as creating calendars and timekeeping systems. These are but a few examples of the sculpture, artwork and writings that survived the conquest and pillaging of these great cultures by the Spanish in the 1500s. Historians today agree that humans arrived in the Americas and did not evolve there. What they don't agree on is when and how they arrived. Some believe that the first inhabitants of Mexico were descendants of Siberian immigrants who crossed the Bering Straits land bridge to North America. Others say they might have sailed or canoed across the Pacific, and even might have been one of the lost tribes of Israel. There are even theories that they were the survivors of the lost continents of Atlantis or Lemuria. The noted American psychic Edgar Cayce reported this as a fact in numerous readings given in the early 20th century. Recently, some researchers like Erich von Däniken speculate that ancient astronauts from outer space arrived thousands of years ago to populate the Earth, or to breed and intermingle with the primitive human cultures they found there. They point to a number of mysterious artifacts that they claim supports their theories. Skeptics say that there are more rational explanations for them. But now, strange, controversial artifacts have appeared that paint a different picture of Mexico's ancient past. Controversial because the images on these artifacts suggest something that most historians and archaeologists refuse to believe. In 2012, Victor Camacho, a Mexican radio talk show host and paranormal researcher, was shown some very unusual artifacts by a friend. These stone carvings were allegedly found by farmers and common landowners in a number of remote sites in northern central Mexico, far from the sites of previously known Mesoamerican cultures. Victor and his wife Gladys began to research these artifacts and soon learned that they had been discovered for at least 50 years, but are generally shunned and ignored by the Mexican government, leading archaeologists and historians. Why, you may ask? One reason is that the landowners have kept their locations secret and have not allowed professional scientists and archaeologists to investigate them on site. Some have been profiting from the sale of these artifacts to private and public buyers. But perhaps the greatest reason why archaeologists, the academic community, and the Mexican government believe them to be fake are the images featured on these artifacts and what they seem to imply. Most people who have seen these images agree that they do not represent human beings, gods, or other things that are native to planet Earth. They seem to represent what UFO researchers recognize as extraterrestrial beings, half-human, half-alien hybrids, and UFO vehicles. These carvings, most etched into polished, hard rocks, show precise, highly developed techniques that suggest that they were created by a very advanced and technically sophisticated culture. Are these authentic ancient artifacts, or very clever hoaxes, as many experts claim? One way to find out is to have them carbon dated, but rocks can't be carbon dated. There are, however, a number of sculptures with other kinds of stones glued onto them. Researchers removed some of these stones and were able to carbon date the organic materials found in the glue. The results of one test performed at a German laboratory date that artifact as 3,800 years old. A second carbon dating of a different sculpture at the University of Arizona AMS laboratory produced a date of 7,521 BC. This is strong evidence that at least some of these artifacts are genuine prehistoric relics. So if we take the position that these are real ancient artifacts, what can we learn by studying the images on them? Let's start with the faces. They depict humanoids with rounded heads, large slanted almond-shaped eyes, small or no noses and small mouths. All of these features are common to what UFO researchers call grey aliens or the Greys. Some are depicted as floating or flying in the air. Another feature common among the beings is that they have 4 fingers. Many people who claim to have had contact with extraterrestrials report that they have 4 fingers also. Other figures appear to be more human, with clothing similar to figures seen in Mayan or Aztec artwork. But their heads are larger than normal humans, and they have those large slanted eyes, even small figures that may represent babies or small children. In many cases, the children are being held up as a possible offering or sacrifice. There are no indications of blood or killing in these renderings, a feature common in other Mesoamerican cultures and artwork. In addition to the offerings of alien children, some of the figures are holding or offering a round orb of some kind. Another interpretation is that the orbs are being given to the kneeling figure. Many figures have what appear to be wings. Was this part of some religious or ritualistic costume, or does it represent the fact that these entities could fly? Some may speculate that these beings are angels or gods, as depicted in other works by advanced cultures worldwide. There are also female figures depicted, with some indications that they are pregnant with extraterrestrial-looking embryos. Researchers in recent years who work with people claiming alien abduction experiences report that they have been impregnated by the ETs and that there is an active program to create human-alien hybrids. These artifacts may indicate that this phenomena has been occurring for many thousands of years. To support the theory that these figures are beings not of this earth, there are many images of flying objects that resemble photos and descriptions of UFOs or extraterrestrial spaceships that have been reported around the world over the past century. Some of these show what appears to be a beam of some kind coming from the bottom of the craft. In cases where they are shown above the figures offering a sacrifice, could this represent the children or hybrids being lifted to the UFOs? Or do they represent the UFOs delivering these alien babies or hybrids to the citizens of Earth? Quite a number of the artifacts show what may be the reason these beings have come to our planet. These round circles may represent the ET's home planet. Some are plain circles, but most are surrounded by dozens of small dots. Does this indicate that their planet was destroyed by asteroids? Another explanation is that these might represent a technically advanced civilization with a planet surrounded by manufactured satellites similar to Earth. In any case, several of these planet icons have several large cracks running through them. It's easy to interpret this as representing earthquakes or other planetary destruction. Some of these images show what appears to be a comet. But instead of hitting the planet, it is aiming away from the planet, which may actually represent their craft leaving their world to escape their catastrophic planetary destruction. Again, we can only speculate as to their meaning. The one aspect of these carvings that matches other Mesoamerican art is the depiction of animals that are common to these regions, wolves or dogs, snakes, panthers and crocodiles. Some even resemble dragon-like reptiles, which can be found on artwork from other ancient cultures around the world. A number of the human figures are seen lying down on top of these creatures. One can only guess at the significance of this. And lastly, many of these stone artifacts contain images that resemble hieroglyphics. They do not compare with any known ancient or modern languages. Some are repeated. Do they represent an ancient language long lost through the ages? They're just another of the many mysteries surrounding these fascinating artifacts. We agree with Victor and Gladys Camacho that these artifacts need to be studied by professional archaeologists and historians. He has personally seen over 2,000 of these artifacts that are in the hands of the people who claim to have discovered them on or near their properties. He and Gladys have traveled to some of the sites themselves, usually in very remote places. If not sold or donated to museums or universities, at least make them available for serious study by professionals who are open-minded enough to look past the implications of their controversial images. Victor and Gladys own more than 30 of these artifacts and are anxious to have experts study them. Scientists and academic professionals are known to have anti-UFO and extraterrestrial biases. They work very hard to protect their libraries of knowledge and resist any evidence that may conflict with their beliefs. Serious research may uncover acts of fraud, but it may also prove that these artifacts are real. And if so, we must all be prepared to open our minds to the incredible stories they have to tell us about our ancient past.
Wow. My first question, and we talked about this as long ago as several years ago, but I had never seen this footage. You had shown me some stills. Victor and Gladys Camacho, you have met and spent some time with them?
Yes, but both Bob and I have. Yeah. We spent 3 full days with them photographing their work in Utah. In February, I think, of 2019.
So you've handled some of these actual objects?
All of them.
Fantastic.
Filming them and photographing them. And Bob, I will say, did an absolutely fantastic job editing this piece together. And he has a fabulous presentation to offer.
Well, all I can say,
Edgar conference.
It doesn't surprise me. This is so well written and so well filmed, but how exciting, in part because no one else is really involved, in my knowledge, to developing the story or even being very aware of it. One question that was answered for me was, again, playing devil's advocate, that what's the angle here? How could somebody perpetrate this fraud and make some money on it? Because you're not going to perpetrate a fraud that you're not going to realize a profit on unless you're some highly tuned esoteric character that will, draw satisfaction from just knowing you hoaxed the world on something. The fact that, of course, as they were starting to talk about in your script, Bob, carbon-14 dating, of course, you can't carbon-14 date a stone. And then, of course, you answer the question right there, organic material in the cement. And it doesn't say a zillion years ago or 50,000. We're talking 7,000, 3,000, 4,000 BC. That's considerable. That's major. And I don't think any of us have to make too much of a stretch to understand why the individuals who own the land where these things have been being found, and I'm sure own quite a collection of them, the last thing they want is to make their location public and have, every media circus as well as, gold rush characters going in there like, tomb robbers and taking what they can get and taking off. It's fascinating. It's really, the imagery is so blatant and so unambiguous. I'm just really doubly now knocked out by this. Your thoughts at this point, Jennifer first and then Bob, in terms of what you have kind of stumbled into here and your responsibility, which we've already had a sense of, very high level production values here and not hitting anybody over the head of how you can do your best to represent this material to a skeptical world or a belief-oriented world, who could care less about the evidence. Gee, these look great. Let's grab them.
Okay, so I'll try to jump in first and say
exactly.
It is a complex subject. We know that some of these artifacts are definitely being faked or hoaxed and sold on the internet for substantial amounts of money.
Sure.
There are people making a profit at this, just like there is counterfeit money and just like there are hoaxed crop circles and other various things. We know this is part of the phenomenon.
Sure.
We also know that some of the historical you might call it providence, but it's hard to prove providence. Yeah. There is some historical providence of some artifacts that were in family collections for 50, 60, 70 years. Yeah. And then some of those collections came together in Mexico and became part of a personal collection that was then offered up to a museum upon some people's death.
Sure.
Because these collections had been in people's personal families because the artifacts were found on their own personal land. And they were found really over many, many, many decades. So there's some historical provenance, some interesting historical provenance that's been researched. There are some fake or hoaxed formations.
Sure.
Or artifacts, I should say. And then there is some new research which is surfacing. We did mention some of the carbon dating that was done on glue, but even that becomes controversial. I called up the University of Arizona and spoke with the head of the carbon dating department there.
Yeah.
His name was Greg Hodges. And Greg just about chewed my head off, claiming that I'm responsible for all negative videos that are out there online, and I have to, be circumspect. But respectfully, I will say he explained to me something very profound, which makes a lot of sense because I have respect for scientific methodology. Sure. I have a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Arizona. So he said, "Tell me, Greg. Come on, I'm all ears. Look, I'm an alum of the university. I have a science background. Tell me what your bugaboo is." And he said, "Well, if anybody sends us a check for $500 and a little bag of stuff in a clear little plastic bag, we'll carbon date it for you. That doesn't mean it's proof that it came from an artifact with any kind of significant provenance, or that we removed the eye and then clearly and in a clean room setting scraped this glue off. So as a scientist, I can't tell you that glue came from that artifact as real provenance. And these videos are making it look like that's true. Yes, we were sent money by a Russian man whose last name starts with an O. He sent us a check. He claimed this is what it was. We just sent back the carbon dating. we never saw the artifact. We didn't do it in a clean room. Now, the other thing Greg explained to me is that anything that's got any kind of glue material in it, it most likely came from a petroleum product. And if it has a petroleum product in the glue, which most glues do, then it's automatically dated like way back into the ancient past, clearly because of chemical components in the glue. But it could be a modern glue, but you're going to get radiocarbon dating that puts it much further back. So you have to go and look at other interesting artifacts, which I'm going to let Bob describe, because we know there are some other artifacts which have organic material in them. So I'm going to turn it over to Bob.
Yes, please.
We know that there are a number, and we saw a number of Victor's pieces that had extra stones glued onto them.
And also the Scott Walden's.
There was a pipe where very small holes were drilled through these rocks for several acres. And what sort of technology even now could do that? But when you look at and handle these, they don't look like they've been created recently. And I know forgers can be good at making this, but we're talking not about bone or wood or clay figures. We're talking about carved in hard stone and in rock. And a bunch of these have so much carving done on them and to them that to me, it would take quite a bit of time for somebody even now with modern technology to create these types of artifacts.
And there's not even a hint of any machine, cutting.
No, there's no way to tell how these were made. But there is signs of wear and of aging on them. Like I said, they don't feel or look modern. And something that I did not bring up in the documentary, but when you're looking at these, they're saying, they're polished stone. But as you saw in the big, large, round object, that was gray and stone colored, and obviously worked on and polished. But a great majority of these artifacts have a coating of some kind of white, hard, maybe ceramic, or I don't know, some kind of material, so that when they scratch into it, you're seeing the color of the natural rock through it. The dark lines are the color of the natural rock. That these rocks are not white. That's not their natural color. So these have been coated with something, and it's very hard. I mean, you can try to scratch it with something, and this material is not easily scratched. So that's another aspect of this that's mysterious and represents some kind of advanced technology. And somebody today would have to spend an awful lot of time and effort to create that. And I don't know if it would be worth, I'm not sure exactly what they're charging for these things. But I'd have to charge a whole ton of money for my time on that.
I'll also mention a very important thing which has come to our attention, which we'd like to include, and we've negotiated a bit with Scott Walden to do this. There's a fairly famous gentleman who has explored these artifacts as well and purchased a large collection himself. And he has a program, I think, on
Unearthing America.
Yeah, it's called Unearthing America.
It was,
it's no longer running, but I don't remember what channel it was on. But Unearthing America, Scott Walden discovered and purchased a pipe that matches these artifacts. It has similar artifacts on it. The pipe was found in the Baja region of California around the turn of the century. It was uncovered by a road crew, or maybe it was like in the 1930s or 40s. I think they were digging up and doing road work, and they discovered this pipe. Now, somehow it made its way to Scott Walden, and he discovered it had resin in it. And the resin is organic material which can be dated. And he had it dated, and he got similar dates as the other researchers did around 7000 BC. So it's quite perplexing that there very well could be some original artifacts which started the the whole production of the fake industry of artifacts, because you'd think the idea had to come from somewhere, right? Maybe it was just, the whole ancient alien theme. Maybe there were actually some original artifacts which have been, put in private collections and are now being duplicated for the purpose of, making money on the internet. And there's also the issue of the drug cartels, which own and control a lot of the regions where some of these artifacts are being found. So for people who are not Spanish speaking or not originally from Mexico to just go down there and start climbing around and exploring in caves, we may well come across a stash of drugs and be murdered and never show up again. Or be ransomed, or something like that. So we really have to tiptoe lightly around the subject. But
it's so multi-layered.
Very much so.
It genuinely is a mystery within a mystery. And again, my very first take on seeing some still images of these objects were, if it looks too good to be true, it usually is too good to be true. But that's like saying, oh gosh, that actress is so beautiful. How good an actress can she be? And then, of course, the humbling experience of going, that is one amazing actress. I don't care how they look. These objects are incredibly intriguing. It is easy to understand that once even a moderate amount of word got out, somebody could hire craftspeople, show them these images, give you X per piece. And then, of course, the fake intrigue of, this is a very valuable artifact and very controversial. And you're going to have to get it out of the country on your own because these things are going to be worth so much when the aliens land, et cetera, and so forth. So, the dark aspects and the thought of, alligators, snakes, dragons, space people, but drug cartels? I think I'll wait till the documentary comes out. Jeez.
And the fact that these are for sale, there are laws in Mexico that actual purified Mayan or really recognized ancient artifacts that you cannot sell them. It's against law that they belong to Mexico and should go in a museum or whatever. You can't. But they are allowing these to be sold because they don't believe them to be real artifacts.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah, they're just turning a blind eye. And you wonder, is somebody being paid off because they're ignoring all of these artifacts that are being sold? Or, what's the real story there,
a cottage industry in independent manufacture of good fakes. And also
the police departments could benefit from that. I mean,
yes, exactly. But that cultural arrogance that we is similar to, wait a minute, the dating can't be right from the water effect on the outside in the back of the Sphinx, because that means the game is over for all of us who have lived, eaten, breathed this ethic, this tradition, this fairy story of Egyptology. And please, all my certificates and all my graduate degrees and, the little plaques thanking me for my excavations in museums around the world. No, if I'm wrong, I'd rather that the lie continue, because otherwise, I have an identity crisis coming at me. And let's shift gears now slightly and massively, slightly in that we are still working in the realm of film here, and massively because the subject is so different. The most accomplished collaboration that you two have come through together is simply one of the finest single case UFO-related documentaries ever made, bar none. Travis, the true story of Travis Walton. And obviously I know the backstory, but you two returned to Arizona repeatedly over 5+ years to deepen your level of contact, cooperation, trust with the protagonist, but also to begin to make contact and gain the respect of so many people around Travis Walton, directly and indirectly. Did you guys have any idea what you were in for when you basically signed on for this?
Well, I will tell you, if Bob hadn't agreed to take it on with me, I don't think I would have been brave enough to start the project myself.
It was a big adventure, just getting the footage shot and going out there.
Yeah.
But this was Jennifer's initiate. I'll let her really tell most of the story, because I was co-producer, but primarily cameraman for much of this footage.
Well, over the 5 years again, you got to, be the bug on the wall, to see this stuff close up without having to, initiate decisions beyond, camera angle, that kind of thing, which is a remarkable position to be in. And I'm wondering if you could share with our viewers, and in my case, listeners, because you can't see me, an anecdote about Sheriff Gillespie. Sheriff Gillespie, in the Hollywood movie version, Fire in the Sky, is played by the late, great James Garner. And I thought it was one of the finest characterizations in the film. And one of the things I thought was kind of an invention purely of the screenwriters, Tracy Torme, with input, of course, from Travis Walton, was that the character played by James Garner didn't seem to completely dismiss the possibility. But when you were actually filming Sheriff Gillespie, you learned something from him. I think, Jennifer, you asked the question of, did you believe any part of this? And his response was, I only wish it could have been on camera, but can you give us that story?
Of course, I would be happy to. I went back. Bob didn't get to be part of that interview because I shot that interview in 2014, and Bob was there in 2013 with me. But we started the whole project in 2010, and we didn't finish it till 2015. So really, it was certainly a 5-year project.
Yeah.
And so we went to Travis and I and another wonderful gentleman named Gary Hilton, who did our drone photography, shot an interview with Martin Gillespie in his backyard, and we're so glad that we did. He is now no longer with us. He passed away, and he really had a lot of respect for Travis. He actually brought Travis some of his records when he left his employ as a sheriff after about 40 years in that position. And he suspected that the records would be burned, so I'm really glad that he brought some of the records to Travis and Mike Rogers, which he did. But back to the interview, he really eventually, I think, came around to completely believing Travis's story, but he couldn't openly really say that because he was the local police sheriff and he had a reputation to abide by. But what he did say when we were finishing up the interview is, if you turn off your camera, I'll tell you some of my own UFO stories. And Travis and I just kind of looked at each other and gulped. And he proceeded to tell us, one very profound story, which really blew us away. And I've never heard any sort of story like this or since this time. But I will say that Deputy Ellison, the other police officer who was really responsible for a lot of this investigation, and I believe, is still alive. We also interviewed him, and he did the same thing. And I didn't even really ask him. Maybe I sort of did. Maybe I said, have you seen anything yourself? And he said, well, yes, but, I'm not going to let you record it, but I'll tell you about it if you turn your camera off.
Yeah.
So there had been sightings too, well reported in the newspaper as before Walton's case. In fact, Travis's brother, Dwayne, had seen what looked like a tic tac at a very low level, right at treetop level, maybe a couple of years before Travis's event. So it's really quite fascinating, that they came forward and shared their own stories like that with us.
As part of any creative project where you have a plan, you may have an outline, you may have the whole thing mapped out, but when you think creatively and keep out of your own way, sometimes new directions will suggest themselves, and the form and sometimes the content of what you're working on will shift, which I think is a very exciting part of any creative process, whether writing, filmmaking, music, what have you. And the number of individuals who are making commentary, and I include myself in it, our extraordinarily diverse backgrounds. You told a story within the story, and then you bring in informed voices to give their opinions, findings, thoughts, intuitions. And, part of the process is very serious. Other parts are extremely enjoyable. And I guess it was about half a dozen years ago, the three of us were working together to capture a number of interview segments. It was a major UFO conference, just on the other side of the Pennsylvania state line in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. And you had rented a hotel suite for us to work on the filming. And I don't know, we might have had 10 or 12 people that, kind of lined up and came over the course of the weekend to shoot their segments. I remember I had a really bad cold, was on some kind of cold med, and was taking little naps in between. But so many of these people are people that we really care about, have a good time with. And I put together a number of snapshots just from my photo files. And it begins with some of these outtakes from this filming. And Bob, of course, you are in a minimal number of them because you are the man taking the pictures.
Yeah. The man behind the camera.
Exactly. Right. And Lee Spiegel, a good friend and a great newsman. Lee was the UFO paranormal reporter for the Huffington Post for many years. But we go back to, I first met Lee in the 1980s when he was a syndicated talk show host with NBC Radio in New York City. And first interviewed me there, and we've been friends ever since. And I just adore the guy, and he was a wonderful guest. And this is somebody who just keeps getting more and more appropriate, respectful attention. James Fox has certainly emerged as one of our most powerful, best informed, brilliant, passionate filmmakers on the subject of UFOs, and has, of course, a new documentary about to drop any day now that he's been working on for the last year or so in Central America, and that we are all looking forward to seeing. And one with our friend Bambi in there. And then myself and my buddy here cracking each other up. And somebody took a picture besides you, Bob. So where we go from here, and Travis Walton had decided at one point that he wanted to have a conference, ideally a series of conferences. It came out to 2, but a conference as close as possible to the location in the Sitgraves National Forest, true wilderness, where the events in question happened. And Jennifer and I were involved in both of the conferences. The second one, which took place in 2015 on the actual 40th anniversary of the events in question, gave Travis an opportunity to bring a number of people out to this location. And this is one view. There was a massive forest fire in this area, in this day and age where more and more, this is the plague, the scourge of the earth. This is more than 20 years after that forest fire. Forest fires do not recover quickly. But you could see 30, 40 miles. And Sitgraves National
That's-
Forest covers parts of 3 states. It's over 500,000 square acres. It's true wilderness. And at this juncture, we had come out in a school bus and we walked quite a ways in from the road. And the next thing, Travis was defining the area within, 30, 40 feet where he was taken. And he had on a headset and was relating this to us. A dear friend, Clifford Mahudi, who left us some months ago at the age of 78, also a dear friend of Travis Walton's, which is how we met him. Clifford was a Zuni tribal elder who took the drastic step of feeling that certain secrets of the Star People that had been imparted to the Zunis should be shared with non-Indians, with us white people. He felt very strongly we could use it. And the Zuni tribal elders did not agree, and he was excommunicated from tribal life and spent the rest of his life, again up until a few months ago, helping us understand from a native Indian point of view what part of that tradition was. We've known Travis for a lot of years. I've never seen him more serious than with a number of people right there. And it wasn't just a rote telling of the story, as he sometimes needs to do in a conference talk or what have you. This was different. This was being back there again. You could hear a pin drop. And it was obvious by his voice that he wasn't phoning this home, that as he was talking, memories were coming up and informing not just what he was saying, but how he was saying it. It was a great experience to be there.
Can I mention, Peter, while you're
Please.
showing these pictures, that Travis and I just did a screening this past Saturday night at Lilydale, which is the oldest spiritual community in the United States, up near Lake Erie, below Buffalo. And we had a standing ovation for the film. We had about probably 120 people in the audience in this historic place where Tesla had presented, and even Einstein had come and presented, and it was really a fascinating place. And we had Damian Brinkley, who was there that weekend as well. I was very impressed with the film, and it was a real honor to be able to be there with Travis. And the Q&A lasted a good hour and a half. People did not want to let Travis go. It was really great.
That's really gratifying to hear. This is us after the presentation, which I must say was pretty emotionally draining for us. I can't imagine what it was like for him. Now, as we know, great efforts have been maintained to keep this location out of the public domain, so to say. The last thing that any of us want is, there'd be a souvenir stand selling rocks and sticks from the Travis Walton location, abduction location, or people just going out and, scrounging it themselves. And another reason, and a very compelling one, is that some of the most profoundly unambiguous evidence has to do with the tree rings in the area of the clearing. And, we're talking now more than 40 years, and the stumps that remain, are subject to disintegration. So some years back, some stabilizing chemical was used. It messed up the look a little bit, but I think it has, held it in place. And this is one of those examples. For example, if you look, I guess my cursor doesn't show here, but if you look at the main circle as a clock face at about 2 o'clock or so, just opposite the Meanwhile Here on Earth logo in the upper right, you see tree rings that are very thin. And you literally see them as your eyes move to the left, getting wider and wider and wider and wider. For me, this is one of the most exciting, I can't tell you, genuinely exciting pieces of physical evidence in the entire history of documenting the reality of trace cases, physiological changes to organic material that have come in contact with truly anomalous activity. And to actually see that stump, as opposed to wonderful photographs of it, it was visceral. That was exciting. Now, the next photo is a sentimental favorite of mine. It worked out, and this would have been about not quite 6 years ago, definitely a bit less. My dad was still alive, and my father started reading UFO books not long after I did. He was curious, and he plowed through quite a number of them, met certainly more than his share of better known colleagues. But the person whose account he always took the most serious was Travis Walton's. And he read, I think, the paperback, which came out, The Walton Experience, in 1979 or so, when it was updated, and Travis had it republished as Fire in the Sky in 1996, I think, or around that time. I got a copy, read it, my dad read it, and he said over the years, if there was anybody that he really wanted to meet in this field who had been through something, it was Travis. And Jennifer, you had worked out, this was when the film was still, you and I and Travis in combinations were traveling with it and doing quite a number of screenings, sometimes several within a week or a weekend. And we had just done one in Jersey, and you had, and he's going to be speaking for Mainline MUFON on the Wednesday. And we had, sometime before that, visited the great old nonprofit State Theater in Ithaca. And they had nothing cooking on that May weekend. And so Travis Walton visited the town where I live. And it was quite interesting having an audience with a lot of my friends and acquaintances and family, finally getting to connect with him. My dad was 97 at the time, so he wasn't coming out to the theater. But the next day, Travis came to the house. And my dear friend Ket Thorvaldsen was visiting from Norway. You were there. And we had a really wonderful afternoon. And it meant the world to my dad. And I think Travis was more affected than he had imagined. He loved my dad's memoir. And there was a real friendship there. And it hit Travis quite hard when Dad passed. Not that it was a tragedy. He was more than 98 and a half years old, but a very special day that without you two, you know, my dad would never have had. Going back sometime before this, and you'll remember this one, Jen.
Oh, yes. Zechariah. We used to do that often.
Yeah.
I don't think I have that picture. That's a great one.
Oh, I'll
Peter.
send it to you. Zechariah Sitchin and his lovely wife lived on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. And starting in the late 80s, I think I had written to him, you know, an old-fashioned letter, and he responded. And even though I was working in the area of contemporary, relatively UFO studies and not in his area, we hit it off. And he would occasionally take me out to lunch. And it was almost always to a small cafeteria, old-fashioned as heck, in the Rockefeller Center complex, and just be very encouraging to keep writing and keep studying. And boy, he could be a tough nut. I mean, I'm sure you remember, Jennifer, times where he'd get a question after giving a talk, and he
wouldn't answer it.
His social graces could be lacking at times when he had no patience for fools. and no time to waste on anybody who he felt was superficial or,
That's right.
Anyway, and now we move into the final part of our little photographic journey here. This is right out of a Currier and Ives wonderful 19th century tinted print. Exeter, New Hampshire is as pretty and as archetypical and as historic as any town square in New England. One of the reasons we can have this wonderful conference and festival is that the town gives us a special break on this beautiful classic town hall. And this town hall was built in 1860. And many luminaries have spoken at it over the years. It's pure Americana. It's a great hall to have an event like this in. The ground floor has open seating. You just set up the chairs. But the second floor is like an old-fashioned Quaker meeting house or Orthodox Jewish synagogue, for that matter, three-sided wraparound balcony. And I guess the thing that makes it so distinguished is this. Abraham Lincoln spoke in this extraordinarily beautiful historic building. And this is where, except for the last 2 years, we have our wonderful UFO conference and festival. So if you're honored enough to be speaking, you wonder how close you're standing to where Abraham Lincoln stood when he gave his UFO talk there in 1860. Also, as the sign notes, this Exeter is officially the town where the Republican Party was born, and Exeter Phillips Academy, still a very fine school, continues on many, many years after. And our beautiful little band shell there, fixed up a bit with visitors. This is right across the way from the town hall. It's a B&B. I had the pleasure of staying there before we moved over to the Around the Corner B&B. And this building was built in 1809. And a little bit of conversation at the end of the conference. I think this was 2015 or so. And this is maybe 2019, which would have been our last one. And because the folks at Exeter so appreciate all my work over the years, they gave me this car. I mean, is that nice or what? In my dreams, they gave me this car.
Yeah.
So, Bob, we know the talk that you're going to be giving. Jennifer, can you tell us something about the presentation you will be making in very short time?
I don't know if we have time, Peter.
Wait, hold that thought for a second, because I realized we are over time. My apologies to my producer. Jennifer Stein, Bob Terrio, thank you so much for joining me. Peter Robbins, Meanwhile Here on Earth, stay well, be kind to each other, and fight for what you believe in. And see you next week.
You too, Peter. Thank you.